Y'all planning for this?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA podcast, What Works Wednesday edition. I am delighted to have a compliance guest on the phone. No, I am not in compliance trouble, at least not yet, though Rich might tell me otherwise. But really excited to have Rich Chen on the line. He is a compliance attorney who's really both a master of compliance, but also a lifestyle advisor, or a lifestyle attorney in his own right. Rich, you're actually joining us from France right now.
That's right. Yep.
I love it. I love it. Well, for those of you that don't know Rich, I definitely recommend looking him up, following on social media, LinkedIn. He's got a lot of great content. But Rich, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your practice, and then we'll jump into some compliance goodies.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Matt. I've been a practicing attorney for about 25 years now. It's hard to say that a little bit, but time flies, I tell you. But it's been great. It's been great. I've seen the evolution of the business and opportunity for advisors to go independent and carve their own path and serve their clients the way they want to. I started this firm about 3 years ago, and we provide a broad swath of regulatory and compliance advice, both on an ad hoc basis and an ongoing compliance program management for our clients. We do mock audits and SEC exam work too. But on the legal side, we do, firm structuring for RIAs. We review and, negotiate commercial contracts and, client agreements, employment agreements, and M&A transactions, asset sales, and we also do private fund formation for firms that are looking to launch private funds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I would say first before we dive into questions, I talk to a lot of advisors that are considering going the RIA route. And I think they make the mistake of asking their existing compliance, which is a bad idea. Then they just start Googling, what is it like to become your own RIA? And I've got to say, and I always tell advisors to do this, find a compliance attorney that you like and respect. Rich, you're obviously one of those, and call them and pay for their time and actually learn what's really got to happen, not what you read on Google or what your broker-dealer compliance told you.
Absolutely. The old adage says, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I mean, too often I've seen situations where folks get in trouble, whether it's a regulatory issue or a legal issue. Oftentimes that's just as big of a problem if there's an issue with a client, right? So, and basically setting a good firm foundation up front, especially for advisors who are already so passionate about serving their clients and making sure, and it's hard because when you come from another firm where compliance is already done, it's a lot of new things to actually sort of take on and understand. And, that's why we're here. And that's why the opportunities are greater than ever for folks, our new RIAs who are starting, because they have the opportunity to reach out to people who have significant expertise, in a variety of different areas so that they can focus on serving their clients the best that they can.
Boy, I love that. One of the things that I admire in talking with you, Rich, and as I follow your content, and this is what I think is missing from some compliance avenues, is you're very quick to give a kind of a clear answer, at least as clear as the answer could be, right? If I say, hey, can we do X, right? There might be some ambiguity in the laws around that, but you can say very specifically, this is best practice. And I think that's a must-have from legal counsel or really any counsel, right? Is you need really clear answers like this is okay and this is not okay.
Absolutely. Well, and to the extent that there are, but the thing that I think that this business is about and where more compliance folks should be is that at the end of the day, it's about problem solving, right? And you're problem solving within a regulatory maze. So the first thing is to understand what that maze looks like. But the second thing is to try to figure out within those parameters what you can and can't do. And I think that is where good compliance and legal folks stand out, is that they take the extra step to say to the client, I'm here to help you figure out, how to solve the problem that you're trying to face, given, some of the constraints that you have from a legal and compliance perspective. And I'll tell you no if you really can't do it. I'll give you straight practical guidance that will really help you to get where you need to go. And that's the orientation that I think all sort of compliance and regulatory and legal folks should have.
Boy, I love that. Rich, as we look at the independent space, and most of our advisors listening here, a lot of them are in the independent space, what are either some compliance mistakes that you see people making or things that people should be aware of, or maybe things that they're afraid of that really aren't that big of a deal? Anything that kind of really comes to mind that you're passionate about in this area?
Yeah, I think the unfortunate reality right now is that you see, as we do in SEC exams, people are always asking us, what are you seeing in SEC exams? The regulators, both at the SEC and the state level, are becoming much more sophisticated, particularly, I think, at the SEC level. but they're also becoming more demanding, right? And so there are increasingly significant and detailed requests that are being asked. And there are some serious issues, admittedly, out there, in terms of tackling data security, proper fee billing, marketing issues, and things like that. But they're becoming increasingly detail oriented. And so it's really, really important that advisors get a handle on the core issues. And oftentimes you can find these. One of the best ways to do it is to look at the annual SEC exam priorities, which are generally published between January and March. And even though that's SEC focused, I think it really gives a flavor for what regulators really are looking at overall. And obviously the states can vary, but it's really, really critical because they are now bringing on at least the SEC staff accountants who will actually go in and check your numbers, right? And make sure that they'll look at your financials, they'll look at your fee billing, and they'll tell you, they can spot, whether they see inconsistencies. And if there are, they bring them to your attention. So, at one level, it's nice that the regulators are more sophisticated, but at the same time, it sort of raises the hurdle for advisors to make sure that they're fully compliant. And I think the other thing is to make sure this is probably the most important piece of compliance advice is to document what you do. A lot of advisors do good work, right? And the key is to document the work that you do, right? And to make sure that folks understand it doesn't have to be anything all that formal necessarily, as long as you can indicate, I did this review, I did this analysis, and I just, and you document it, whether you send an email to timestamp it to yourself or something that demonstrates I did the analysis. It goes a long way in terms of building what's called the tone at the top, where the regulators believe that there's more credibility when they actually see that. Even if they disagree with the result, they can't disagree with the effort and the analysis. And oftentimes that will go a long way in terms of how much a regulator will actually sort of dig deep into, and trust sort of what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good point that you bring up. When we first formed our RIA, which was many years ago, we got within the first year, I think they called it a technical assistance visit from the SEC. They were very friendly. And that was one thing they really stressed. They were specifically looking at our investment models. Right. And they said, hey, tell us how you came to these models. And we talked about it. And he says, cool, where can I see documentation of that? And I said, I don't know. I never saved it. And he says, okay, well, in the SEC's lens, that means that this never happened. He was actually being really helpful, very mentoring. He says, hey, you have to have documentation. If you're looking at Morningstar, down those reports. If you're looking at Bloomberg, down those reports, and keep a log of all the work that you're doing.
Absolutely true, especially nowadays with the fiduciary interpretation that came down from the SEC a few years ago. They're digging deep into investment due diligence and suitability reviews, right? Those are sort of really, really critical to make sure you have nowadays because they're right at the core of when SECs look at retail-focused advisors. And I totally agree. The SEC, when they're coming in the first time, they're often very helpful, right? They actually are not looking at the gotcha exercise. Now, if you don't fix what they tell you to fix, the second time around, it could be a different story, right? But by and large, they try to be pretty helpful, especially for new RIAs, to give them, guidance in that exam, as well as sort of more communications like I talked about with the SEC exam priorities. They're trying to communicate what's important to them, and it's important for RIAs to actually take notice.
Yeah, that's almost kind of an action item if you haven't yet as an RA. And even if you're not an RA, right, to look and say, hey, what are those compliance, what are those exam priorities for the year? That doesn't get you off the hook for everything else, but hey, how prepared are we for that? Absolutely. Rich, interesting story that you may cringe. I was at an industry conference and some big shot compliance attorney who we won't name was giving a presentation, and half of his presentation was spent belittling the SEC, unrecorded, and belittling that these guys, and I won't repeat the stuff they said because I don't want my voice attached to that, but kind of this idea of like, hey, it's us against them. And kind of to your point, like, hey, if you're following the rules, it's more of like, how do we do this together? That's not like a pass or get out of jail free. But I think it's critical that advisors remember, hey, we can't view these people as the enemy. Like, we need to be prepared, but we need to be professional.
Absolutely, absolutely right. Everyone is trying to get to the same place, right? Yes. And to treat the SEC confrontationally is not going to help things, at all. And I think, there are points where I disagree with the SEC, but, I always take with whoever I deal with, give them the benefit of the doubt that they're trying to do the right thing, right? And it's a matter sometimes if we disagree with them, we just have to communicate it in a way where people will understand it. And I totally agree. Confrontation is not the answer.
Yeah, whether that's the SEC or the IRS or the police officer that pulls you over, right? Let's use some common sense here.
There's constructive ways to do that, right? Exactly.
That's right. That's right. Rich, what are some of the other things that come to mind for you as you're talking with advisors listening to the podcast that they really need to be aware of in this current environment?
Well, so data security is right at the top. Unfortunately, we see way too many data security incidents these days, and some of them are really heartbreaking. And I know a lot of folks have a lot of good measures. I'll just sort of give the two that I think are the most important is to make sure you have multi-factor authentication on any sort of services that you use. And nowadays, you can get endpoint security monitoring that actively monitors your device for cybersecurity only at a reasonable cost, even for small advisors. Yes. I strongly recommend those things because it really, really helps. I'm thinking about things in terms of real world losses. We've seen, unfortunately, very large losses at some firms that could have been helped by some of these things. The other thing is to really not to ignore the legal issues. Oftentimes there's a lot of focus on compliance, but there's a lot of one-sided agreements out there that folks enter into, whether it's with service providers or not drafting proper employment agreements to protect your firm, things like that are really, really, they don't necessarily seem that important up front, but down the road, I can promise you, when people come to us, oftentimes they wish they had taken the time up front to actually draft or negotiate good agreements with the people that they work with up front.
That's a good observation. It makes me think, as financial advisors, we always bemoan clients that go to cheapwills.com or some do-it-yourself estate documents. But then how many of us are doing that for employment agreements or vendor agreements, right? Who's actually looking at those contracts? I think sometimes we think, I'll just sign it and it's not a big deal.
Yeah, it's not a big deal until there's a disagreement. And unfortunately, we see those, they don't happen every day, but, they happen enough where, people, when they come to us, unfortunately, it's a regret of theirs because, some of like I said, the ounce of prevention is worth the pound of cure.
Back on the data loss, are you seeing those where it's like like external hackers, for lack of a better term, or is it internal data loss, like an employee messes up and sends stuff, or an employee maliciously takes data?
Seen both. Yeah, typically it's not as much internally focused. Most of it is still external hackers. A lot of people who impersonate clients, impersonate advisors, right? So we've seen that both ways. An advisor impersonating impersonating advisor, and the client sends the money to the wrong place, or a client account gets hacked and the advisor sends the money right to the wrong place. And so it's really important that the advisors have good verification checks on any cash movement out from client accounts, and also to educate clients, because oftentimes to have measures in place so that clients aren't duped into, giving money the advisor didn't request in the first place. So it's a two-way street there, but really, really, I can't emphasize it enough, given the heartbreaking stories that we've seen.
Yeah, that's a good one that you bring up. Something that we implemented a couple of years ago internally was any unexpected money request, even if they're first party, even if it's from the client's brokerage account to their bank account, we still do a verbal confirmation. Now, sometimes we'll just leave a message if it seems pretty normal. Right. But of course, like you said, if it's a third party wire, that's an immediate red flag. But even a first party wire, we've seen clients that have had their bank accounts hacked, and then they're sending requests to Fidelity, our custodian, and it seems normal, and then the money's disappearing. Yeah, you've got to just go to the nth degree to verify that stuff.
And nowadays, the custodians are asking for that insurance, social engineering, and sort of death by employee. So it's good that those are out there to protect advisors, and you should definitely sort of think about what coverage is appropriate there. But the best practices measures, Matt, as you mentioned, in terms of making sure there's verbal verification, is really, really important.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Rich, we could go just a mile deep on any of these topics, but what are some action items that you would point out to our listeners, things that people can implement today, whether they're kind of in the independent space or not? Anything that comes to mind there?
Yeah, no, I think that, the first thing is really to take a good risk assessment of the firm, right? And to make sure understand that compliance and legal issues evolve over time, right? Like the business, they evolve over time. There are new risks that get presented every time there's a change in the business. And so it's important to identify, sort of and take a fresh look. For SEC registered firms, you're required to do that annually. But, for all firms, I think it is healthy to actually take that risk assessment to evaluate. And ideally, to get someone perhaps, who's independent of the firm, who might have a fresh set of eyes to look at it, right? Whether it's us or somebody else, I think it's important to have someone who has that fresh perspective and the expertise to actually sort of think through those issues. The other thing is really, especially on the data security and things like that, I think it's really, really helpful to get granular when you have training on data security, right? There are policies and procedures, but I think there are tons of good videos out there on YouTube and otherwise that will really help you to think through what are the most likely vulnerabilities that you face when you're working at a firm that is such a rich target for, hackers. And and so there are a lot of good training videos. You don't necessarily have to pay someone. You definitely, it helps, but there are a lot of good resources out there that are eligible to train your employees and to teach them, what's out there. The other thing is, go on social media, sign up for newsletters. We're not the only ones that provide, actionable guidance out there. There are definitely good firms. Get alerts, sign up for alerts from different firms. Not every firm covers all the same stuff. And so the more that you have that information, the more that you know what's on the landscape, it will help you to sort of keep abreast of what's going on. And if you need to reach out to someone to get that help on those topics, then you can do that.
Oh, I love that. And of course, to our earlier point, make sure that you're recording all of that, right? So that heaven forbid you do have a data breach and the SEC gets involved or legal gets involved, you can look and say, wow, look at all of the work that we did. Not we were asleep at the wheel and we got unlucky.
It makes a difference. It really does.
It really does. Well, Rich, for people that have more compliance questions or want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can always email me. I always am happy to answer questions for folks, and, look, I always feel like this mission is to be helpful to as many folks as I can. My email address is rich@richardlchen.com. Right. Or you can always find me on LinkedIn. I think I put myself as a seasoned attorney, who happens to be blind, which is true. But I think it's, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I have a lot of posts because I am passionate about making sure I give some helpful tips to everyone out there. So definitely look me up. And if you have any questions, always happy to be a resource.
Well, and Rich, I'd love to have you back on this show to talk about how you're running your primary. Right now, you're literally in France as we're recording this with your family. As you mentioned, you are blind. You've built this incredible practice despite that, maybe we'll call it a roadblock, if you will. So I'd love to talk more about that. I think it's easy for some of us to make excuses and say, well, hey, I can't take my family to France because, and Rich, you're doing that, right? You're running this great practice.
Absolutely.
And you're blind and you're doing all these things. That's really cool.
I've been truly, truly blessed by the Lord, I believe. And I feel like it is really an opportunity to show people, that you can do a lot. You can do a lot. And if I can be an encouragement in that regard, it's my pleasure to do that.
Rich, I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time today, sir. Enjoy France with your family. And for everyone listening, until next time, happy planning.
Hold on before we go. Something that you need to know. This isn't tax, legal, or investment advice. That isn't our intent. Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice. Be a better husband, father, mother, and wife. The perfect RIA.